I warned them 3 times before the storm came. The first warning was polite, the second was documented. The third was recorded on camera while thunder rolled over the Arizona mountains behind us like distant artillery. Nobody listened anyway, especially not Dana Holloway. She stood there in her white desert blazer beside the brand new stone landscaping wall the HOA had built across the drainage channel and smiled at me like I was some bitter old man complaining about dirt. This community, she said, folding her arms, is finally becoming beautiful. Beautiful. That word stayed in my head the night the water came. I remember the smell first. Hot asphalt. Dust. Rain hitting dry earth 30 miles away before it ever reached us. People who never lived near desert washes think floods announce themselves with giant waves and roaring rivers. They don't understand how quiet danger starts out here. The desert waits. Then suddenly it doesn't. I was standing on my porch around 11:40 p.m. watching heat lightning flicker across the sky beyond the McDowell foothills when my weather monitor started screaming. Flash flood alert. Upstream surge detected. I looked toward the wash immediately, and my stomach dropped. The channel was already backing up. Water should have been flowing south through the reinforced concrete culvert beneath Holloway Ridge Estates. Instead, it was pooling behind the HOA's decorative retaining berm like water inside a bathtub with a sealed drain. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out into the wind. The neighborhood looked unreal at night. Palm trees bent sideways under incoming gusts. Landscape lights glowed gold against dark storm clouds. Expensive stucco homes sat perfectly still while thunder echoed over the valley. Then I heard the first impact. A hollow metallic boom. Debris striking the blocked drainage grate. I reached the wash entrance 2 minutes later and saw exactly what I'd been warning them about for 6 months. The HOA landscaping project had narrowed the runoff corridor by nearly 40%. Decorative boulders, raised flower beds, imported gravel, concrete curbing, all shoved directly into a federally mapped emergency overflow route, and now the water had nowhere left to go. Rain upstream had already turned the dry wash into a moving wall of mud and debris. Tree limbs slammed against the grate. Water surged upward against the decorative stone barrier Dana Holloway fought so hard to install. I pulled out my phone and started recording automatically. Timestamp visible. Location tracking enabled. Old habits. 23 years working county flood control teaches you one thing above all else. If disaster comes, document everything before people start lying. The water rose another foot while I filmed. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Martin Reyes across the subdivision. Elias, water coming into garage. Another message arrived immediately after. Drain backing up near lot 14. Then another. The HOA community page exploded in panic. People posting videos. Kids crying, garage alarms screaming. One woman asked if she should evacuate. Dana Holloway still insisted the situation was under control. I almost laughed when I saw that, because at that exact moment the retaining wall cracked. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just a sharp sound. Concrete giving up against pressure it was never designed to hold. I stepped backward immediately. The wall split down the middle, and the flood hit the neighborhood. The surge blasted sideways through Dana Holloway's award-winning Xeriscape garden first. Water ripped through decorative cactus beds and tore apart the imported stone pathways the HOA newsletter had featured 2 weeks earlier. Palm trees tilted violently. Outdoor furniture slammed against stucco walls. Mud exploded across luxury patios. Then the current spread downhill. Fast, very fast. Water followed the slope exactly the way the county models predicted years ago before the HOA ignored them. I kept recording, not because I enjoyed it, because I knew what would happen tomorrow. The HOA would blame unexpected rainfall. They would blame the county. They would blame climate change. They would blame homeowners. Anyone except themselves. A transformer blew somewhere uphill. The neighborhood dropped into darkness. People started screaming. Emergency lights flickered on across garages and driveways while muddy water rushed down the middle of the private road like a river cutting through concrete. And standing right in the middle of it all was Dana Holloway, frozen. Her white blazer soaked brown with mud, her perfect garden collapsing around her piece by piece. She saw me recording. Even through rain and darkness, I could see the expression on her face change. Not fear, recognition, because she remembered every warning, every email, every engineering report, every certified letter she ignored. I walked closer through ankle-deep water. You need to call emergency management, I told her calmly. She stared at the destroyed landscaping behind her. You said this couldn't happen, she whispered. No, I answered. I said exactly this would happen. Another section of decorative wall collapsed upstream. Water surged harder. A parked golf cart rolled sideways into a mesquite tree. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance now. Fire department, county flood response. Too late to stop it. Right on time to document it. Dana grabbed my arm suddenly. You worked for the county, she said. You can stop this. That part almost broke my heart, because people like Dana always believe someone else can control consequences after they ignore reality long enough. But water does not negotiate. Physics does not care about HOA authority, and desert floods never care about appearances. I looked toward the blocked culvert again. The steel drainage grate was completely jammed now with branches and construction debris. I already knew why. 3 weeks earlier, I'd watched HOA contractors dump leftover landscaping material near the channel after midnight. I recorded that too, quietly, patiently, the way investigators build timelines. The rain intensified. Sheets of water hammered rooftops while muddy runoff spread across the lower properties near the clubhouse. Then came the sound I'd feared most, a child crying for help. I ran immediately. Training takes over faster than thought sometimes. I followed the voice toward the lower cul-de-sac where floodwater had trapped a family sedan halfway out of a driveway. Water swirled around the tires while a woman struggled to pull 2 children through the current. I helped carry the younger boy uphill while firefighters finally entered the subdivision from the east gate. Chaos everywhere now, neighbors yelling, dogs barking, power lines humming overhead. And still the water kept coming because the main overflow corridor remained blocked behind Dana Holloway's landscaping project. One firefighter recognized me. Mercer, he shouted over the storm. What happened here? I pointed directly toward the wash. Illegal obstruction, I said. Even in the rain, the guy's face changed immediately, because everyone in county infrastructure knew that channel. It existed for one reason only: keep this exact neighborhood from flooding. Around 2:15 a.m. county crews finally broke apart part of the decorative berm using emergency equipment. The trapped water burst through the opening like a dam releasing pressure. The neighborhood survived. Barely. No homes collapsed. No fatalities. But 12 properties flooded. 3 retaining walls failed. Multiple vehicles were destroyed. And Dana Holloway's luxury showcase garden looked like a riverbed. By sunrise, news vans were already arriving outside the subdivision gates. Residents stood in soaked pajamas watching mud dry across streets lined with million-dollar homes. The smell afterward was unforgettable. Wet concrete, sewage, broken desert plants, and underneath all of it, the sharp metallic scent of political panic. Dana tried avoiding cameras at first. Then county inspectors arrived. That changed everything. I stood quietly beside my truck holding a thermos of black coffee while investigators photographed the collapsed drainage route. One of them approached me around dawn. You, Elias Mercer? I nodded. He glanced toward the destroyed wash. County says you filed complaints. 6 of them. You got documentation. I handed him a waterproof folder. Inside were time-stamped photos, hydrology maps, certified mail receipts, drainage calculations, HOA meeting transcripts, and drone stills showing the obstruction growing month by month. The investigator flipped through the pages slowly. Then he looked back at the flooded subdivision. That's a hell of a paper trail. I stared toward Dana Holloway's ruined courtyard while morning light hit the mud-covered stones. No, I said quietly. This is what a disaster trail looks like before people finally believe you. By noon the next day, Dana Holloway had already changed the story. That was predictable. People like her never admit fault immediately. They search for softer words first. Miscommunication, unprecedented conditions, unexpected runoff event. By lunchtime, the HOA emergency bulletin blamed a rare monsoon anomaly. I read the statement sitting on my tailgate while county inspectors continued measuring debris lines along the flooded wash. Rare monsoon anomaly. I almost smiled, because the rainfall totals weren't even historic. That was the ugly part. The storm that flooded Holloway Ridge Estates wasn't extraordinary at all. It was a standard late-summer Arizona monsoon cell moving across terrain that had handled runoff safely for decades, until the HOA decided aesthetics mattered more than drainage engineering. The desert sun came back fast after sunrise. It always does. Mud began drying into cracked brown sheets across the roads, while homeowners dragged soaked furniture into driveways. Contractors arrived with water extraction trucks. Insurance adjusters walked property lines holding tablets and cameras. And everywhere I looked, I saw fear replacing arrogance. Not dramatic fear, quiet fear, mortgage fear. The kind that settles into people when they realize their expensive neighborhood may have been built on bad decisions nobody disclosed properly. I knew that feeling well. I'd spent 23 years with Maricopa County Flood Control before retiring at 52. Most of my career involved studying exactly this kind of community development: drainage easements, retention failures, improper grading, developers trying to squeeze luxury landscaping into areas designed for water movement. People think flood control work is boring until water starts entering living rooms. Then suddenly, everyone wants engineers. Around 2 p.m., Martin Reyes walked over while I was checking debris accumulation near the lower culvert. Martin lived 3 houses downhill from Dana Holloway, former Air Force mechanic, quiet guy, good neighbor. His garage had taken 8 inches of muddy runoff overnight. "They're saying this was county maintenance failure," he told me carefully. I kept looking at the wash. "Of course they are. You gonna fight them?" That question hung there a moment. The easy answer would have been yes, but easy answers usually create bad cases. "I'm going to document them," I said. Martin nodded slowly like he understood exactly what I meant, because there's a difference between anger and procedure. One burns hot. The other survives courtrooms. I spent the afternoon walking the drainage corridor with a handheld GPS unit and my old county tablet. The HOA contractors had already started removing pieces of the decorative landscaping project before investigators returned. Another predictable move: destroy evidence before liability hardens. Too late. I had 6 months of records already archived. Timestamp photos, drone footage, meeting minutes, emails, copies stored both locally and off-site. I learned redundancy from prosecutors years ago. Most people in Holloway Ridge didn't know much about my background beyond flood control work. That was intentional. Retirement teaches you the value of privacy. But before county engineering, I spent almost 9 years working investigation support for the Arizona Attorney General's office. Not as an attorney, not as a cop. I specialized in procedural case analysis, public corruption, procurement fraud, financial pattern tracking. Mostly boring work, until it wasn't. That experience changed how I saw HOA boards forever. Because small local power attracts the same personalities as larger political systems, just scaled down behind palm trees and neighborhood newsletters. Control without oversight becomes addiction, and Dana Holloway was deeply addicted to control. I first realized that 8 months earlier when the HOA announced the Desert Beautification Initiative. That was the official name. The proposal sounded harmless at first: native landscaping, decorative pathways, improved property values, enhanced community identity. Residents applauded during the clubhouse presentation while Dana stood beside glossy architectural renderings showing elegant stone terraces along the central wash. I remember raising my hand near the end. "What's the drainage impact study look like?" The room went quiet immediately. Dana smiled politely. "The county approved the project." "Approved what specifically?" "The redesign." "That isn't an engineering answer." Her smile tightened slightly after that. Most residents ignored the exchange. I didn't, because I'd seen those exact diagrams before in failed developments across the county. Pretty landscaping inserted into runoff corridors by people who fundamentally misunderstood desert hydrology. Water in Arizona doesn't flow gently during monsoon season. It accelerates violently through dry channels, carrying debris, sediment branches, rocks, trash cans, pieces of fencing, sometimes entire vehicles. Flood control maps exist because nature repeats itself, but HOA boards rarely respect things they can't market in newsletters. 3 days after that meeting, I requested project permits from the county database. Nothing matched. No updated drainage authorization, no floodplain variance, no easement modification approval. That bothered me immediately. Then came the contractors. Large crews arrived before dawn over the next few weeks, hauling decorative boulders and concrete edging directly into the runoff corridor. They narrowed flow areas section by section, while residents complimented the resort atmosphere on social media. I started photographing everything, quietly, systematically. Dana noticed eventually. That was when the violations began. First came a warning letter about improper trash container visibility, then citations over gravel coloration near my side fence, then accusations that my weather monitoring equipment violated HOA aesthetic rules. Petty pressure tactics, designed to exhaust people slowly. Instead, they confirmed I was asking the right questions. By late spring, the HOA board meetings became openly hostile whenever drainage concerns surfaced. Dana routinely cut off residents mid-sentence. Financial reports disappeared from agendas. Contractor bids were discussed privately instead of publicly. That part interested me most, because procedural concealment almost always hides financial concealment nearby. I started attending every meeting after that. Not arguing, just observing, taking notes, recording timestamps, watching who avoided eye contact whenever project invoices appeared. One name surfaced constantly: Desert Crest Landscaping Solutions. Small contractor, recently formed LLC. Received nearly every beautification contract. Oddly expensive invoices. That triggered my instincts immediately, especially after I checked state records and discovered the company's registered agent shared a last name with Dana Holloway, her brother. I didn't confront her then, not yet, because accusations without documentation are noise. Documentation without emotion becomes evidence. Around sunset on the second day after the flood, county engineers returned with laser measuring equipment. I watched them survey the failed berm while Dana tried speaking privately with the lead investigator. He walked away from her halfway through the conversation. Bad sign for her, good sign for reality. A small crowd gathered nearby, residents exhausted from cleanup, people whispering now instead of praising the HOA. Fear changes communities quickly, especially when expensive homes start smelling like floodwater. Then Dana spotted me standing near the wash. She marched across the muddy pavement still wearing oversized sunglasses despite the fading light. "You've been poisoning people against this board for months," she snapped. I stayed calm. "You blocked a flood channel. That project increased property values. It also redirected runoff." Her jaw tightened. This community trusted us. I looked around slowly. Workers pulling ruined drywall from garages, destroyed landscaping, mud-stained streets, insurance inspectors documenting damage. "No," I said quietly. They trusted physics. That hit harder than yelling would've. Dana stepped closer. "You think you're smarter than everyone because you worked for the county?" "No," I answered. "I think water moves downhill whether people vote against it or not." For a moment, I saw something underneath her anger. Not guilt. Panic. Real panic. Because deep down she already understood something terrible. The flood itself was survivable. The paperwork afterward might not be. That night I sat alone in my home office reviewing archived county plats while monsoon winds rattled the windows again outside. Old habits. Coffee, documents, silence. I enlarged a drainage overlay from 1998 and studied the marked easement running directly beneath the HOA's decorative landscaping project. Then I saw something I'd missed before. A notation buried near the corner survey marker. Federal Runoff Contingency Corridor. I leaned closer to the screen, and suddenly the entire situation changed. Because if that designation remained active, the HOA hadn't just violated county recommendations. They may have obstructed federally protected flood infrastructure. I stared at the map while thunder flickered far away across the desert again. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop. Holloway Ridge Investigation. And for the first time since the flooding began, I stopped thinking like an engineer. I started thinking like an investigator again. The first thing investigators always look for is motive. Not emotion, not personality. Money. Money explains decisions people later pretend were misunderstandings. 3 mornings after the flood, I drove downtown before sunrise and parked outside the Maricopa County Records Building with a folder full of HOA documents sitting on the passenger seat beside me. The city still smelled damp from the storm. Out in the desert, runoff channels carried muddy water south through concrete spillways, while cleanup crews worked overtime across half the valley. News stations kept replaying footage from Holloway Ridge estates, luxury homes, destroyed landscaping, residents wading through muddy garages, Dana Holloway avoiding cameras. The story was gaining traction now because wealthy neighborhoods flooding always becomes a headline in Arizona. But reporters still thought it was just another storm story. They didn't understand the engineering yet, or the fraud. That part was still buried. I intended to change that carefully. The county records clerk recognized me immediately when I stepped inside. "Mercer," she said with tired eyes. "Heard your subdivision got hit hard." "It got obstructed," I answered. She gave me the kind of look public employees exchange when they already suspect the real story. I requested every permit, easement modification, drainage review, and contractor filing tied to Holloway Ridge's beautification project over the last 2 years. The clerk frowned halfway through searching the system. "That's strange. There's no final authorization package attached." That confirmed my suspicion immediately. Large drainage modifications require layered approvals in Arizona. County review, engineering sign-off, floodplain compliance, environmental routing. Documentation trails. Projects don't just appear legally because an HOA votes for them, unless somebody cuts corners intentionally. The clerk printed partial records while I watched the timestamps carefully. Several approvals existed only as preliminary submissions, meaning construction should never have started. Yet it did. I thanked her, loaded the documents into my truck, and drove straight to the old drainage corridor north of the subdivision. Morning sunlight spilled across the desert hills in sharp orange bands while cicadas screamed from the Palo Verde trees. The wash looked different after the flood. Angrier somehow. Nature has a way of exposing interference once water passes through. You could now clearly see where runoff had tried forcing itself around the HOA landscaping project. Scoured soil, collapsed decorative walls, tire-sized debris trapped against concrete curbs. I launched my drone from the edge of the maintenance road and sent it slowly over the damaged channel. The aerial footage made the problem undeniable. From ground level, Dana's project looked elegant. From above, it looked like someone pinched an artery shut. The runoff corridor narrowed dramatically where the decorative berm crossed the wash. Worse chunks of construction debris still sat lodged near the drainage intake. Broken concrete, plastic liner material, landscape mesh. All exactly where they should never have been. I recorded everything in slow panoramic sweeps while GPS coordinates stamped automatically into the footage metadata. Evidence first, conclusions later. That discipline matters, especially when powerful people start panicking. Around noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. "This is Elias Mercer." Long silence. Then a woman spoke softly. "My husband told me to call you." "Who's your husband?" "Board treasurer. Warren Pike." That got my attention immediately. Warren Pike rarely spoke during HOA meetings. Thin man, expensive watches, constantly sweating through his collars. Financial people usually sweat when systems stop behaving predictably. "What can I do for you?" I asked. He's scared. "About the flooding." Another silence. "No," she whispered. "About the accounting." I didn't respond right away. Outside my windshield, hot desert wind pushed dust across the roadside while thunderheads slowly formed again far east near the mountains. Finally, I asked, "What accounting?" He says Dana moved money through landscaping contracts. How much money, I don't know. That answer sounded honest. Fear changes voices in very specific ways. I heard genuine fear there. Not manipulation, not performance. She continued carefully. "He said you used to work investigations. I worked case analysis. He thinks they'll blame him." That part made sense. Treasurers always become convenient scapegoats when financial trails surface publicly. "Tell your husband not to destroy anything," I said. He already copied files. That stopped me cold. What files? Invoices, internal emails, payment approvals. The wind outside intensified, suddenly rattling dry mesquite branches against my truck. Then she said the sentence that changed the entire case. "There are invoices for drainage barriers that were never legally approved." I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. The mechanism. Not incompetence. Fraud wrapped inside beautification. "Can he meet?" I asked. "He's terrified Dana will find out." "Can he meet?" Long pause. "Yes." We arranged a location 30 miles away near an old highway diner outside Fountain Hills. Neutral territory. No HOA residents nearby. No clubhouse gossip network. I arrived early and took a back booth facing both exits out of instinct more than paranoia. Warren Pike looked worse in person. Pale skin, trembling hands, eyes darting constantly toward the windows. He slid into the booth carrying a laptop bag like it contained explosives. "You recorded all those meetings," he said immediately. "Yes, you knew something was wrong." I suspected something was wrong. He stared at the tabletop, then finally opened the bag. Inside were printed invoices, bank transfers, contractor agreements, and email chains spanning nearly a year. I started reading silently, and the pattern appeared almost immediately. Inflated contractor pricing, duplicate invoices, emergency drainage work billed without permits, payments routed repeatedly to Desert Crest Landscaping Solutions, Dana Holloway's brother's company. Warren rubbed his forehead shakily. She kept saying the county approvals were coming later. Did you ever see final permits, Nom? Why keep approving payments? His expression collapsed. Because she controlled the board. There it was again. Small-scale power addiction. The engine behind almost every HOA disaster I'd ever investigated. Dana didn't just want authority. She wanted obedience. And communities built around appearance often surrender oversight faster than they realize. I kept reading, then found something worse. A contractor memo discussing permanent narrowing of the runoff corridor to create enhanced visual symmetry near the community entrance. My stomach tightened, because that phrase meant intentional redesign, not accidental obstruction, not misunderstanding. They knowingly altered flood behavior for cosmetic appearance. You understand what this means? I asked quietly. Warren nodded weakly. I think so. No, I said. You don't. I pulled out the county flood map from my folder and spread it across the table. This channel exists because water velocity increases downhill from the northern basin. The overflow route disperses pressure before runoff reaches residential density zones. Warren stared blankly. I pointed directly at the narrowed section. They turned a release valve into a choke point. Outside, thunder rolled low across the desert again. Monsoon season wasn't finished. Not even close. Warren swallowed hard. She said residents wanted a prettier entrance, and now 12 homes have flood claims. He looked physically sick after that. Good. Not because I enjoyed it, because reality finally reached him. Before leaving, Warren handed me a flash drive. Everything's copied there. What about originals still inside HOA archives? I studied him carefully. You need an attorney. So do you. I expected this. You expected criminal exposure? I looked out the diner window toward darkening clouds gathering beyond the highway. No, I answered honestly. I expected physics. That evening, I returned home and reviewed the files until nearly midnight. The financial trail kept getting uglier. Unapproved drainage modifications, questionable vendor relationships, deleted engineering recommendations, missing review signatures. Then I found the email, sent from Dana Holloway directly to her brother. County engineer raising concerns again. Remove temporary barriers before inspection next month. My pulse slowed immediately. Not faster. Slower. Because calm is what happens when suspicions become proof. The reply underneath chilled me even more. Too expensive to redo now. We'll deal with complaints later. I leaned back in silence while rain tapped lightly against my office windows outside. That sentence would destroy them in court someday. Maybe not today. Maybe not next month, but eventually, because every major case turns on one moment where arrogance enters writing, and Dana Holloway had just handed me hers. The retaliation started the same week the county opened its preliminary review. That timing told me everything. Innocent organizations cooperate. Panicked organizations attack. I found the first notice taped to my front gate at 6:10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning while desert wind pushed dust along the road outside my property. Official HOA compliance violation. The paper claimed my weather monitoring mast exceeded approved visual height restrictions. That would have been amusing if the mast hadn't been standing legally in the same location for nearly 6 years. I photographed the notice before touching it. Time-stamped. Wide angle first, close-up second. Then I archived the images into 3 separate folders. Habit. Procedure matters when people start manufacturing narratives. By noon, 2 more notices appeared electronically. Improper exterior storage. Unauthorized drainage modifications. That second accusation almost made me laugh out loud. The HOA that illegally obstructed a federally mapped flood corridor was now accusing me of drainage violations because I installed erosion gravel near my toolshed after the storm. Classic projection. Dana Holloway wasn't trying to enforce rules anymore. She was building paper smoke. A flood of administrative noise designed to muddy future legal proceedings. I'd seen the tactic before during procurement investigations years earlier. Overwhelm the target, create parallel accusations, shift focus away from core misconduct. But intimidation works best against people unfamiliar with systems. Unfortunately for Dana, systems had been my entire career. Around 3 p.m., county inspectors returned to the subdivision accompanied by 2 floodplain engineers and an environmental compliance officer. That escalated things quickly. Federal runoff designations trigger extra scrutiny because obstruction can create downstream liability extending beyond private communities. I watched from across the street while Dana intercepted the inspection team near the clubhouse entrance. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfectly rehearsed concern. Even from a distance, I recognized the performance immediately. Calm public face, controlled language, minimize exposure. She pointed repeatedly toward the damaged landscaping while speaking. Probably blaming contractors now. That's usually phase 2. But then something interesting happened. The environmental officer walked directly away from Dana and toward the wash carrying a clipboard. Toward me. "You Elias Mercer?" he asked once he approached. "Yes." He introduced himself as Victor Hale from Regional Floodplain Compliance. Professional tone, careful eyes. People in oversight roles tend to scan surroundings constantly the same way investigators do. "We reviewed some of your submitted materials," he said. "Which part concerned you most? The missing permit chain." That confirmed the pressure building behind closed doors. I handed him updated drone stills from the morning survey. Victor studied them silently. Then he pointed toward a section of collapsed decorative curbing near the runoff entrance. "That installed before or after county review?" "After preliminary review. Before final authorization." "Who approved field construction?" "The HOA board claims county clearance was pending." Victor's expression hardened slightly. "That isn't how flood control compliance works." No, it wasn't, and now government personnel were saying it out loud. A small crowd of residents gathered nearby while inspectors continued measuring runoff marks along the failed channel. I noticed people watching Dana differently now, not admiring, evaluating. Communities change once certainty cracks, especially wealthy communities built on appearances. Around sunset, I received another email from the HOA legal department. Aggressive tone this time, formal demand. They accused me of harassment, misrepresentation, and community destabilization. Interesting wording. Especially destabilization, because it implied they were already worried about internal collapse. The email demanded I stop discussing drainage issues publicly. I forwarded it directly into my evidence archive. Then I printed it. Paper still matters. Digital systems disappear conveniently sometimes. Physical copies survive panic. That night, Martin Reyes came over carrying 2 beers and a flashlight. We sat on my back patio while distant lightning flickered over the mountains again. "You hear about the emergency board meeting tomorrow?" he asked. I nodded. "They're trying to pass a special assessment. For flood repairs, for legal defense funding." There it was. The community hadn't even finished cleanup yet, and the HOA already wanted residents to finance protection against the consequences of its own decisions. Martin shook his head slowly. "People are getting angry." "Good. You think they'll remove Dana?" "Not yet." "Why not?" I stared out toward the dark wash beyond the subdivision lights. "Because people cling to authority longer when they're scared." He considered that quietly, then asked the question I knew would eventually come. "You really think this goes beyond negligence?" I took a slow sip from the beer before answering. "Yes." "How?" "Because negligence hides problems." I looked toward the neighborhood. Fraud conceals them. The next morning, the emergency HOA meeting filled the clubhouse beyond capacity. Residents lined walls holding insurance estimates and repair photos, while portable fans pushed humid desert air through the overcrowded room. Dana stood behind the podium wearing a pale blue blazer and controlled expression. "Damage management mode. Classic." "We are facing unprecedented circumstances," she announced calmly. Several residents muttered immediately. One woman shouted, "You blocked the drain!" Applause erupted. Dana raised her hands theatrically. "Please, let's remain civil." Civil. That word appears constantly when powerful people lose control publicly. I stayed near the back beside Martin while board members distributed printed packets outlining a proposed emergency assessment fee. $5,000 per household. The room exploded instantly. People yelling now. One resident demanded financial transparency. Another asked why landscaping invoices tripled over 6 months. Dana deflected smoothly at first. Then Warren Pike made the mistake that shattered the room. He stood slowly from his seat at the board table and adjusted his glasses with visibly shaking hands. I think he said carefully, "We should postpone additional financial decisions until independent review concludes." Silence. Dana turned toward him slowly. That silence told everyone more than words could. Warren avoided eye contact completely, and suddenly residents sensed division inside the board itself. Dangerous moment. Power structures survive through perceived unity. Once cracks appear, publicly collapse accelerates. Dana recovered fast. The treasurer is understandably emotional after the storm, she said. But Warren didn't sit down. Instead, he removed a folder from his briefcase. I believe residents deserve access to all contractor records tied to the drainage project. The room went dead quiet. Dana's face changed instantly. Not anger, calculation. She was trying to decide how much Warren already revealed. Then someone near the front shouted, "What records?" Another voice joined in. "Show us the invoices." People started standing now, phones recording openly. The atmosphere shifted from neighborhood meeting into public reckoning. And Dana knew it. "You are violating confidential board procedure," she snapped toward Warren. "No," he answered softly. "I think we already violated something much larger." That line spread through the room like gasoline touching flame. Residents began shouting over each other. Questions everywhere. Who approved the construction? Why were county permits missing? Why was Dana's brother getting contracts? I watched Dana Holloway lose control in real time. Subtle at first, her voice sharpening, movements becoming rigid, the polished HOA president image starting to fracture under pressure. Then she saw me near the back wall. That was the moment everything turned personal. "You," she said, pointing directly at me, "you created this hysteria." Every head in the room turned. I stayed calm. "No," I answered. "The flood did." Her composure finally cracked. "You've poisoned this community with conspiracy theories since the beginning." I took one step forward. "Did the county approve narrowing the runoff corridor?" Silence. Residents stared at Dana. She didn't answer. I asked again, "Did they approve it?" Dana gripped the podium harder. The board acted within its authority. That wasn't my question. The room felt electrically still. Even the fans sounded louder suddenly. Finally, Dana said, "The approvals were in process." There it was. Not approved. In process. A legal distinction with devastating consequences. People understood it immediately. And somewhere outside beyond the clubhouse walls, thunder rolled across the Arizona desert once again. The second storm warning arrived 48 hours after the emergency meeting. That timing terrified people more than the flood itself, because now the community understood the danger. The National Weather Service issued a monsoon advisory across central Arizona late Friday morning. Potential training cells, high runoff risk, flash flooding possible in previously saturated drainage systems. Previously saturated. That phrase echoed through Holloway Ridge estates like a death sentence. Residents who ignored drainage maps 2 weeks earlier were suddenly buying sandbags and moving furniture onto cinder blocks. Fear changes listening habits quickly, especially after muddy water destroys luxury flooring. I spent most of Friday walking the wash again with a handheld flow meter and updated county overlays clipped inside a waterproof binder. The channel remained compromised. Emergency crews had partially breached the decorative berm during the first flood, but large sections of obstruction still narrowed runoff velocity zones. Worse, temporary debris fencing installed by the HOA after the storm was already trapping sediment again. I photographed everything carefully. Wide shots, close shots, reference scale markers, timestamp overlays. The procedural rhythm calmed me. Always had. People think investigators enjoy conflict. Most of us don't. We enjoy sequence, 'cause leading toward consequence in understandable ways. And the sequence unfolding inside Holloway Ridge was becoming painfully obvious. Around noon, I noticed something strange near the north maintenance gate. Fresh tire tracks, heavy vehicle impressions. Recent. I followed them uphill along the edge of the wash until I spotted 2 HOA contractors unloading decorative gravel from a trailer directly beside the damaged runoff corridor. I stopped immediately. "What are you doing?" One of the workers glanced toward me nervously. "Stabilization work." With decorative gravel, neither answered. That told me enough. I pulled out my phone and started recording. The second worker stepped between me and the trailer. "You can't film us without permission." "Yes," I said calmly. "I can." The man looked uncomfortable immediately. Most people threatening authority rely on confidence. Calm procedure unsettles them because it signals experience. I walked closer to the trailer and zoomed in. Landscape mesh, stone edging, concrete bags, not emergency flood control material, beautification supplies. Again. 2 days before another monsoon warning. My pulse slowed. That always happened when patterns confirmed themselves. Who authorized this, I asked. The workers exchanged looks, then one muttered board orders. Dana Holloway. No answer, which was answer enough. I documented license plates, contractor logos, timestamps, and GPS coordinates before leaving. The workers packed up quickly once they realized everything was being archived. Good. Panic creates mistakes. And Dana Holloway was beginning to make many of them. By late afternoon, county floodplain crews arrived again after receiving updated runoff concerns from multiple residents. Not just me anymore. That mattered. Communities become powerful once fear transforms into collective observation. Victor Hale stepped out of the inspection truck wearing mirrored sunglasses and carrying a thick folder beneath one arm. You filed another report, he said as I approached. I filed evidence. He almost smiled at that. We walked the wash together while dark clouds slowly gathered over the mountains northeast of the subdivision. Victor crouched beside the damaged corridor and touched the fresh gravel pile the contractors abandoned earlier. This wasn't here yesterday. No. He stood slowly. Somebody's trying to reshape runoff before the next storm, or hide previous reshaping. Victor looked toward the subdivision entrance where HOA banners still fluttered beside manicured palms like nothing had happened. Then he asked quietly, "How long did you say you worked investigation support?" "Long enough. I thought so." That conversation changed tone after that. Not official, not friendly either. Professional recognition. Victor understood now that I wasn't just an angry homeowner chasing a grievance. I knew how documentation chains worked. I knew procedural concealment when I saw it, and he knew it too. Around 6 p.m., the HOA sent another community-wide email. Mandatory temporary gate closures due to safety concerns. That line alarmed me immediately. The maintenance gates connected directly to the upper runoff access roads. Emergency crews needed those roads open during flood conditions. I drove uphill at once. Sure enough, steel chains already locked the north maintenance entrance. I stared at them in disbelief for several seconds. Not because it was malicious, because it was catastrophically stupid. A small crowd of residents had already gathered nearby arguing with HOA security personnel. They said nobody's allowed inside until Monday, one resident told me angrily. Who said that, Dana? Of course. Dana Holloway was still trying to manage appearances instead of infrastructure. The security guard recognized me and visibly tensed. Sir, access is restricted. This is an emergency runoff corridor. I'm just following instructions. I photographed the chains immediately, then the posted notice, then the lock serial number. Everything. The guard sighed heavily. Look, man, I don't think this is a good idea either. That honesty caught me off guard slightly. You got a supervisor here? He shook his head. Just us. I looked north toward the darkening mountains. Thunderheads were building faster now. You could feel the pressure change in the air. Monsoon air has weight to it sometimes. Heavy. Electric. The desert goes silent before impact. I called Victor Hale directly. He answered immediately. They locked the runoff access gates, I said. Long pause. You're kidding. I wish I was. 20 minutes later, county vehicles arrived with emergency authority notices. Residents watched from sidewalks while Victor confronted HOA representatives beneath flashing amber lights. Dana arrived shortly afterward in a black SUV. Even from across the road, I could see exhaustion setting into her posture now. But exhaustion hadn't reduced her arrogance. This community has liability concerns, she argued loudly. Victor pointed toward the chained gate. This access route is tied to flood response. The area is unstable. That's exactly why we need access. People recorded everything on phones now. No more quiet compliance. No more trust. Just residents watching institutional collapse unfold in real time. Dana noticed the cameras immediately and lowered her voice, but the damage was already done. Victor ordered the chains removed under county authority. Dana refused. That decision stunned even the security guards. For one long moment, nobody moved. Wind pushed dust across the roadway while thunder echoed overhead. Then Victor pulled out his phone calmly. You understand, obstruction during active flood preparation can trigger state penalties. Dana crossed her arms. You're overreacting. No, Victor answered quietly. I think you still are. That line spread through the watching crowd instantly. You could feel public opinion shifting physically now. Neighbors whispering, people stepping farther away from Dana. Fear turning into isolation. Finally, the chains came off. But not before dozens of residents recorded the confrontation. That mattered more than Dana realized. Public memory forms through moments like that. Not speeches, not newsletters, moments. Rain started just after sunset, soft at first, then harder. I sat inside my office watching radar loops across dual monitors while runoff sensors updated upstream basin levels in real time. Old habits again. The North Basin filled faster than forecast. Bad sign, very bad. At 9:42 p.m., my private weather alert system triggered automatically. Rapid accumulation event detected. I stared at the screen, then at the runoff models beside it. The compromised channel might survive moderate flow. Maybe. But another major surge? Not likely. I grabbed my jacket and headed outside into rising wind. Across the subdivision, lights flickered behind windows while residents waited nervously for something they now understood could destroy their homes. The desert smelled like wet dust and ozone. Thunder rolled continuously now beyond the mountains. And standing near the wash entrance beneath flashing emergency lights was Dana Holloway. Alone. Watching the dark runoff channel. For the first time since this started, she looked afraid of something larger than losing control. She looked afraid of reality itself. Then lightning flashed across the desert sky, and somewhere far upstream, water began moving again. The second flood never fully arrived. Not because the danger disappeared, because the storm line shifted 15 miles east sometime after midnight. Holloway Ridge caught heavy rain, scattered runoff, and enough water to keep everyone awake all night, listening to drainage alarms and emergency alerts. But the catastrophic surge missed us. Barely. By sunrise, the subdivision looked exhausted. Residents wandered through damp streets carrying coffee cups and checking runoff marks like people inspecting wounds after surviving an accident. Nobody trusted the wash anymore, and nobody trusted Dana Holloway. That mattered. Because once fear disconnects from authority, truth starts moving faster. I slept maybe 90 minutes before heading back into my office with fresh coffee and the old county drainage overlays spread across my desk. The federal runoff designation from the earlier map kept bothering me, not because it existed, because of how deeply it had been buried. Most people looking at the flood corridor would only notice standard county easement markings. But hidden inside the archived survey layers was a secondary notation referencing emergency diversion infrastructure tied to a regional runoff contingency program dating back to the late 1990s. Programs like that don't appear casually. They exist because somewhere, sometime, something already went wrong. I logged into the county archival database and started digging backward through flood control records older than 20 years, meeting minutes, engineering memos, regional mitigation studies. Half the files were scanned crookedly from old paper copies. Classic government archives. Slowly the history surfaced, and the deeper I read, the quieter I became. Because Holloway Ridge Estates should never have been approved without preserving that runoff corridor completely intact. Back in 1998, a major monsoon system triggered catastrophic flooding across the northern basin outside Scottsdale. Two subdivisions nearly washed out after runoff velocity overwhelmed undersized channels. Afterward, federal and county engineers created emergency overflow mapping throughout the area, including our wash. The corridor wasn't decorative drainage. It was intentionally oversized emergency infrastructure designed to absorb overflow pressure if upstream systems failed. Meaning Dana Holloway's landscaping project hadn't just narrowed a neighborhood ditch. She obstructed part of a regional flood contingency route. I leaned back slowly in my chair. That changed exposure dramatically. County violations create civil problems. Federal runoff interference creates investigations. I printed everything immediately, then scanned duplicates into encrypted storage. Again, old habits. Important records tend to disappear once panic spreads through organizations. At 11:17 a.m., someone knocked on my front door. Not rang, knocked. Careful, controlled. I opened it to find Warren Pike standing there sweating through another expensive dress shirt despite the morning breeze. "You were right," he said immediately, "about what they're destroying records." I stepped aside without speaking. Warren entered carrying another cardboard file box against his chest. His hands trembled visibly now. "Dana called an emergency executive session this morning," he continued. "No residents allowed, no recording." What happened? She blamed contractors. Said documentation inconsistencies were administrative. Administrative. He laughed weakly. The sound had no humor in it. Then he opened the box. Inside sat shredded paper fragments sealed in clear evidence bags. I stared at them. You collected this? My wife did. That impressed me. Most people panic during organizational collapse. Some become useful. She found maintenance staff feeding documents into industrial shredders behind the clubhouse. When? 2 hours ago. I studied the fragments carefully. Invoice headers, contract identifiers, drainage modification language, partial signatures, enough to establish intent if reconstructed properly. More importantly, enough to prove destruction efforts existed. Did anyone else see 3 maintenance workers? Did they record anything? Warren nodded. One of them filmed part of it. Good, very good. Because obstruction after disaster often damages cases more than the original misconduct. I walked toward my office cabinet and removed a yellow legal folder marked AG Support Archive. Warren noticed immediately. What's that training material? For what I looked directly at him. For building procedural timelines during corruption investigations. His face changed slightly then, like he finally understood who he'd walked into business with. I spent the next 3 hours reconstructing sequences across my office wall, using printed maps, contractor invoices, permit records, and the newly discovered federal runoff documents. Patterns became clearer by the minute. Dana Holloway didn't accidentally ignore drainage law. She systematically bypassed it. Contractors were hired before approvals existed. Landscape modifications expanded despite engineering objections. Review meetings disappeared from official minutes. Invoices inflated progressively as construction continued. And after flooding occurred, records began disappearing. That sequence matters legally. A lot. Around mid-afternoon, Victor Hale arrived unexpectedly. He stood silently in my doorway for several seconds, studying the wall of documents spread across my office. You build cases like law enforcement, he said finally. Old habits. You were more than flood control. I considered lying briefly. Didn't bother. Attorney General investigation support, I said. Victor nodded slowly, like that explained many things at once. Then I handed him the federal runoff maps. His expression hardened immediately. Jesus. Exactly. He spread the overlays across my desk and compared them against current subdivision plans. You're certain these easements remained active? They were never legally vacated. Victor rubbed his forehead tiredly. Then the HOA obstructed protected contingency infrastructure. Yes, and if runoff crossed federal mitigation thresholds, it becomes larger than county enforcement. The room went quiet. Outside, hot desert wind rattled mesquite branches against the windows, while distant thunderheads slowly rebuilt again over the mountains. Victor looked around my office once more. Evidence binders, timestamp photos, flow calculations, contractor timelines. You've been preparing this for months. I've been documenting reality for months. He almost smiled at that. Almost. Then his phone rang. He answered quietly near the window while I organized additional records. I heard only fragments. Possible escalation. Yes, intentional modifications. Federal review may be necessary. When he hung up, his expression looked different, more cautious. Regional oversight wants formal assessment by Monday, he said. That fast. Once federal corridors appear in paperwork, people move quicker. Good. Because Dana Holloway was still trying to manage perception while the legal landscape underneath her shifted toward collapse. Victor packed the copied maps carefully into his case, then paused near the doorway. You understand they'll come after you harder now. I nodded. They already are. No, he said quietly. You haven't seen desperate yet. That line stayed with me after he left. Because he was right. Desperate organizations stop thinking strategically. They start thinking emotionally. And emotional people make dangerous procedural mistakes. I saw proof of that 2 hours later. The HOA posted another violation notice against my property online publicly this time. Unauthorized surveillance activity. The accusation claimed my drone documentation violated community privacy standards. Ridiculous on its face, but strategically revealing. Dana Holloway wanted to discredit evidence collection before investigators expanded their review. Classic pre-collapse behavior. Unfortunately for her, she moved too aggressively. Because attached to the public violation notice was an image. A cropped aerial screenshot supposedly proving my harassing surveillance. Only the screenshot accidentally exposed something catastrophic. In the lower corner of the image, partially visible beneath HOA markup graphics, sat a construction overlay file label. FEMA Overflow Diversion Phase. I stared at the screen for several seconds, then zoomed in carefully. There it was. Not theory anymore. Not hidden inside forgotten county archives. The HOA possessed documentation acknowledging the overflow corridor existed, meaning Dana Holloway knew exactly what the drainage route was before construction ever started. My pulse slowed again, that investigator calm settling over me deeper now, because intent had just entered evidence officially, and intent changes everything. I printed the screenshot immediately and added it to the wall beside the federal maps. The case was no longer about negligence. Now it was about concealment. Outside evening shadows stretched across Holloway Ridge estates while residents cleaned storm debris from sidewalks and waited nervously for the next monsoon warning. Most of them still believed the flooding was the disaster. They were wrong. The real disaster had started long before the rain ever arrived. It started the moment people with authority decided appearance mattered more than truth. The recall movement started quietly. That was important. Public outrage burns fast, but organized pressure survives longer. 3 days after discovering the FEMA diversion overlay, I met with 7 homeowners inside the back room of a small Mexican restaurant 20 minutes outside the subdivision. Neutral location again, no HOA cameras, no clubhouse gossip, no Dana Holloway loyalists listening through half-open doors pretending to refill coffee. The group looked exhausted. Flood repairs were still ongoing across Holloway Ridge. Insurance adjusters kept revising estimates upward. Contractors argued with homeowners over mold remediation and drainage stabilization. Fear had settled into the community permanently now. Not storm fear anymore. Financial fear. One couple worried their mortgage company would reassess flood exposure risk. Another resident feared property values collapsing once county findings became public. Martin Reyes sat near the corner quietly listening while I spread documents across the table. No emotional decisions, I told them immediately. A woman named Claire Bennett frowned. They flooded our homes. Yes. They lied. Yes. Then why shouldn't we fight back publicly? Because public anger without procedural structure becomes noise. I didn't say that harshly, just honestly. Dana wants chaos, I explained. Chaos makes documentation harder to follow. The room quieted. I slid copies of the federal runoff overlays toward them. These matter more than yelling. Martin studied the maps carefully. So what exactly are we doing? We build a clean record. That became our strategy. Not revenge, not dramatic confrontation, sequence, documentation, pressure through systems that already existed. Over the next week, I helped residents organize every communication tied to the flood and the drainage project. Emails, violation notices, contractor invoices, photos, insurance statements, meeting recordings. We created timelines showing exactly when the HOA began narrowing the runoff corridor and exactly when concerns were dismissed publicly. The patterns looked ugly once assembled together, especially financially. Desert Crest Landscaping Solutions received nearly 80% of all beautification payments over 11 months despite limited competitive bidding. Several invoices referenced emergency flood mitigation enhancements months before the flooding occurred. That detail mattered enormously, because it suggested the HOA already knew runoff concerns existed internally. Meanwhile, Warren Pike quietly provided additional accounting files every few days. He looked worse each time I saw him. Sleep deprivation, shaking hands. The physical symptoms of someone realizing white-collar misconduct eventually becomes criminal exposure. You need legal counsel now. I warned him repeatedly. I know. You waited too long already. I was afraid. That answer stayed with me afterward. Because fear explains most corruption systems better than greed does. People fear losing status, fear isolation, fear becoming targets themselves. So they stay silent until silence becomes impossible. Around the same time, Dana Holloway escalated publicly again. The HOA announced a Community Protection Task Force. The name sounded ridiculous. The purpose was worse. Residents questioning board actions would now face formal review for conduct harmful to neighborhood stability. I read the email twice just to confirm it was real. Then I forwarded it directly to Victor Hale. His response came 11 minutes later. Are they seriously threatening residents during an active investigation? Yes, I typed back. His next message arrived almost immediately. Keep every communication already doing that. The intimidation campaign backfired faster than Dana expected. Residents who stayed neutral before now became openly hostile. One elderly homeowner approached me outside the mailboxes and handed over printed HOA letters dating back almost a year. "They fined us for reporting drainage erosion," she whispered. Another resident provided photos showing HOA crews pouring concrete near runoff markers after county engineers requested temporary clearance months earlier. Then came the maintenance worker. His name was Luis Ortega, mid-30s, quiet, nervous. He asked to meet after dark at a gas station outside Scottsdale. I arrived early again, always early. Luis kept checking over his shoulder while speaking. "They told us move debris into the wash before inspections." "Who told you?" "Property manager first, then Dana herself." "Did you record anything?" He hesitated, then handed me his phone. Video footage. Shaky but clear. Nighttime construction activity beside the runoff corridor. Workers dumping leftover landscaping material directly against drainage barriers while HOA supervisors watched nearby. Timestamp visible. My chest tightened slightly watching it. Not emotionally, procedurally. Because this wasn't careless maintenance anymore. This was active concealment. "Do investigators have this yet?" I asked. Luis shook his head immediately. "I don't want my name involved." I understood that. Whistleblowers in HOA systems often become social targets long before legal systems catch up. I copied the footage carefully and returned his phone. "You did the right thing," I told him. His laugh sounded hollow. "Doesn't feel like it." "No, it rarely does." That weekend, the local media finally shifted coverage away from unexpected flooding and toward possible infrastructure misconduct. A regional news station aired drone footage showing the narrowed runoff corridor beside archived county flood maps. Not my footage. Victor later confirmed investigators released portions independently. Smart move. Keeps evidentiary chains cleaner. Dana Holloway refused on-camera interviews afterward. Also smart. But too late. Once visuals reached the public, narratives hardened quickly, especially aerial visuals. From above, the obstruction looked impossible to defend. Sunday evening, residents packed another emergency HOA meeting. This one felt completely different. No polished suburban energy anymore. Just tension. The clubhouse smelled like wet carpet and anger. People arrived carrying folders instead of wine glasses. Dana attempted control immediately. "We are continuing cooperative dialogue with relevant agencies." "Did you know about the federal runoff designation?" The question cut through the room instantly. Dana froze briefly. Not long, but long enough. Everyone noticed. "I'm not discussing ongoing legal matters." A resident near the front stood up. "You discussed landscaping plenty." Murmurs spread across the room. Another homeowner shouted, "How much money went to your brother?" More voices joined in. "What happened to the permits? Why were records shredded? Who locked the emergency gates?" Dana's face tightened visibly now. She looked toward the board members for support. Most avoided eye contact, especially Warren. That isolation mattered psychologically. Authority depends on visible reinforcement. Without it, leaders suddenly look very human, very vulnerable. Dana finally pointed toward me near the back wall. "This coordinated attack is being fueled by one disgruntled former county employee." I stayed calm, always calm. Emotion muddies sequence. "No," I answered quietly. "It's being fueled by water." That line silenced the room harder than yelling would have. Because everyone there had seen the flood personally. They remembered muddy garages, destroyed landscaping, children evacuated in the dark. Physics had already testified. The meeting collapsed shortly afterward into procedural chaos. Residents demanded independent audits. Board members argued openly. Several homeowners announced formal recall petitions publicly for the first time. Dana walked out before adjournment surrounded by 2 HOA attorneys. But her control over the community had fractured permanently now. Outside afterward, Martin stood beside me beneath flickering parking lot lights while thunder rolled faintly again beyond the mountains. "You think she's finished?" he asked. I looked toward the dark runoff wash stretching beyond the subdivision. No. Why not? Because desperate people usually make one final mistake. That mistake came sooner than I expected. At 1:13 a.m., Monday morning, my driveway motion alert activated. I checked the camera feed immediately. A black SUV idled near my mailbox. Dana Holloway stepped out wearing dark clothing and carrying a flashlight. I watched silently from my office monitor while she approached the property line holding something in one hand. Then she shoved an envelope into my mailbox aggressively before driving away. Interesting. Very interesting. I waited exactly 15 minutes before walking outside with gloves and my body camera recording. Inside the envelope sat a typed letter. No signature, no HOA branding, just one sentence. Stop digging before someone gets hurt. I stared at the page quietly while warm desert wind moved through the mesquite trees overhead. Threats, finally. And threats meant one thing above everything else. The record we were building had started terrifying them. I didn't call Dana Holloway after the threat letter. I didn't confront her. I didn't post it online. That's where people destroy their own cases. Emotion wants reaction. Procedure wants preservation. At 1:42 a.m., I sealed the envelope inside an evidence bag, photographed the mailbox position, documented tire impressions near the curb, and uploaded the camera footage into 3 encrypted archives before sunrise. Then I called Victor Hale. He arrived before 7 a.m. The desert sky looked pale gray behind him, while cleanup crews continued replacing damaged landscaping throughout the subdivision like people desperately trying to erase memory itself. Victor reviewed the footage twice without speaking. "You're certain that's her vehicle?" "Yes. And you didn't touch the envelope barehanded?" "No." He nodded slowly. "Good. Chain of custody matters even before law enforcement becomes formally involved." Victor slid the evidence bag carefully back across my kitchen table. "You understand what this means? It means she's panicking." "No," he said quietly. "It means this investigation just changed categories." That line settled heavily into the room. Outside, sprinklers hissed across expensive lawns, while flood-damaged drywall sat piled beside curbs waiting for removal. The neighborhood looked normal at a glance again. That's the strange thing about suburban disasters. Appearance recovers faster than truth. By mid-morning, county investigators formally expanded their review into obstruction and financial misconduct tied to the drainage project. Not criminal charges yet, but the language changed. That mattered. Every institution has thresholds where vocabulary becomes warning signs. Review becomes inquiry. Inquiry becomes investigation. Investigation becomes exposure. And Dana Holloway was racing toward exposure now. Around noon, Warren Pike called, sounding almost incoherent. "They're cleaning the archives. What exactly does that mean?" "Servers. Financial drives, maintenance logs." I stood immediately. Who, Dana and the property manager? Are they deleting records? "I think so." I grabbed my keys before he even finished speaking. When systems begin erasing data, time matters. I reached the clubhouse parking lot 13 minutes later. Maintenance trucks sat behind the building beside large industrial disposal bins. 2 HOA employees carried cardboard boxes through the rear service entrance while Dana's black SUV remained parked near the loading area. I activated my body camera automatically, then noticed something else. Heat. Strong concentrated heat signatures visible through the thermal attachment clipped to my phone mount. Interesting. Very interesting. I moved closer carefully behind the maintenance structure and aimed the thermal lens toward the rear utility corridor. Bright hotspots glowed behind the concrete wall. Paper destruction generates thermal spikes fast, especially industrial shredders. I recorded continuously. Timestamp visible. Location tagging enabled. Then I heard Dana's voice inside. "Remove anything referencing contingency routing." My pulse slowed instantly. That investigator calm again. Not adrenaline. Clarity. Because hidden systems always reveal themselves eventually through pressure. I kept recording while maintenance staff carried another load of document boxes toward the disposal area. Then Victor Hale's county truck entered the parking lot unexpectedly. Perfect timing. Dana emerged from the service entrance seconds later and froze when she saw both me and the active county vehicle. Her face changed immediately. That brief naked look people show when internal panic collides with external authority. Victor stepped out holding official paperwork. "We need access to all archive project records tied to the flood corridor modifications." Dana recovered quickly. "Those materials are already being organized." Victor glanced toward the disposal bins. "Organized where?" No answer. The maintenance workers stopped moving entirely now. One of them quietly backed away from the shredding area. Smart man. Victor walked past Dana directly toward the service entrance. She stepped in front of him. "You can't enter private HOA property without notice." Victor handed her the paperwork calmly. "Actually, we can under Active Infrastructure Review Authority." That silenced her. Around us, residents had already started gathering in the parking lot again. Phones out, recording everything. Public trust was gone now. People watched Dana the way communities watch collapsing institutions, not with shock anymore. With suspicion already confirmed emotionally, Victor entered the records area with 2 county staff members while I continued documenting exterior activity. 20 minutes later, one of the investigators exited, carrying partially shredded contractor binders inside clear evidence bags. Another carried removed hard drives. Dana Holloway stopped pretending after that. "You've destroyed this community," she snapped toward me across the parking lot. I looked around slowly. Flooded homes, repair crews, residents filming their own HOA president beside county investigators. "No," I answered quietly. "You did." Her expression twisted sharply. For a second I thought she might actually scream. Instead, she lowered her voice. "You think you're some hero because you worked for the government? No." "Then what do you want?" That question lingered strangely between us. Because underneath all the legal exposure and financial misconduct, Dana still didn't understand the core issue. This was never about power for me, never about humiliation. I looked directly toward the damaged wash behind the subdivision. "I wanted you to stop blocking the drain." She stared at me silently, and for the first time since this started, I think she finally understood how small the original request actually was. That realization seemed to shake her more than the investigators did. By evening, the story exploded publicly. Local news stations obtained thermal footage showing nighttime activity behind the clubhouse, alongside reports of possible document destruction during active county review. Residents flooded social media with meeting recordings, flood photos, and archived HOA emails. The narrative shifted completely now. Not natural disaster. Institutional misconduct. The recall petition crossed 60% support before midnight. Then the forensic accountant called. Her name was Denise Carver, former municipal fraud examiner hired independently by several residents pooling legal funds together. Calm voice, razor-sharp questions. We met the next morning inside my office surrounded by binders and wall maps. She studied the invoice chains silently for nearly an hour before speaking. "This isn't sloppy bookkeeping. No, it's structured diversion." That confirmed my suspicion exactly. Denise pointed toward repeated payment sequences routed through Desert Crest Landscaping Solutions. They inflated project phases gradually to avoid triggering external review thresholds. "How much money?" "Initial estimate." She leaned back carefully. "Maybe 400,000. Even after years around corruption investigations, that number hit hard. Not because it was enormous, because this was a neighborhood HOA. People trusted these boards with retirement savings and property protection. Instead, Dana Holloway had treated the community like a private financial engine wrapped in landscaping brochures. Denise continued tracing transfers while I reviewed the thermal footage again. Then she stopped suddenly. "Wait!" She pointed toward a contractor authorization signature buried inside one invoice packet. "This approval code doesn't match standard county formatting." I moved closer. She was right. The permit reference looked subtly wrong. One extra character. One altered sequencing pattern. I pulled the archived county templates immediately, then compared them side by side. Silence filled the office. Because there it was. Not just missing permits. Forged permit references. Dana Holloway's board had inserted fake county approval identifiers into contractor documentation. I sat back slowly. Denise exhaled once through her nose. "That's criminal exposure." "Yes." Outside my office window, thunder rolled softly over the desert again, while evening sunlight turned the mountains deep red beyond Holloway Ridge Estates. The storm outside had passed days ago, but inside the HOA, the real collapse was finally beginning. The third storm arrived on a Thursday night. Not dramatic at first, no television helicopters, no apocalyptic sky. Just heavy desert humidity pressing against the valley all afternoon, while dark clouds slowly gathered over the mountains north of Scottsdale. The kind of weather most residents would have ignored a month earlier. Now people watched the sky like survivors waiting for bad memories to return. County crews had spent days stabilizing sections of the wash after the second near event. Temporary barriers were removed. Sediment traps cleared. Emergency access routes reopened under direct oversight. But the runoff corridor still wasn't fully repaired. Not yet. Because full reconstruction required engineering approval, federal review, and active litigation preservation. The system moved carefully now. Too carefully for nature sometimes. At 5:30 p.m., the National Weather Service upgraded the basin alert to severe flash flood watch status. Training cells possible. High-volume runoff expected after sunset. I sat inside my office monitoring upstream sensor feeds, while radar loops crawled across dual screens beside the wall of evidence still covering half the room. The investigation had exploded beyond local coverage by then. County auditors, environmental review teams, financial investigators. The HOA's attorneys stopped speaking publicly altogether. Dana Holloway hadn't appeared at a community meeting in 6 days. But consequences don't pause simply because people disappear. Around 7 p.m., Martin Reyes knocked on my front door holding a flashlight and rain jacket. "You seeing the North Basin readings?" "Yes, they're bad." I turned one monitor toward him. Upstream accumulation levels were climbing faster than previous projections. The northern desert terrain above Holloway Ridge was already saturated from prior storms. Water absorption had dropped sharply, meaning runoff acceleration would happen sooner this time. Martin stared at the graphs quietly. "Will the channel hold?" I answered honestly. "I don't know." That honesty mattered. False reassurance kills people faster than bad weather. By 8:12 p.m., rain began hammering the subdivision hard enough to blur streetlights into gold smears across wet pavement. Emergency alerts activated almost immediately afterward. Residents started moving vehicles uphill again. Sandbags reappeared across garages. The entire community had developed storm trauma now, and underneath it all sat one brutal truth. None of this had to happen. At 8:47 p.m., Victor Hale called directly. "We're deploying additional county crews," he said without greeting. "You expecting overflow? We're expecting pressure." That wording told me enough. Pressure inside drainage systems. Pressure inside investigations. Pressure inside political offices now scrambling to distance themselves from Holloway Ridge. Outside, thunder cracked violently over the desert. The wash began moving. I drove uphill carefully through rain toward the north corridor while emergency lights flashed across the subdivision entrance. Residents lined sidewalks under umbrellas, watching runoff gather again near the damaged drainage route. Nobody looked at the landscaping anymore. Nobody cared about beauty now. Only flow. Only survival. I parked beside the upper maintenance gate where county crews were already staging equipment. Victor stood near the runoff channel wearing rain gear, soaked nearly black beneath flashing amber lights. "How bad?" I asked. He pointed upstream. "Worse than the first storm." I followed his gaze and saw it immediately. A wall of muddy runoff advancing through the northern wash system, carrying branches, debris, and fast-moving sediment directly toward the compromised corridor. Not catastrophic yet, but building. Fast. The county crews began clearing emergency spill paths, while engineers shouted flow estimates over the storm noise. Then someone yelled behind us, "The south retention wall." We turned simultaneously. Water was already overtopping one section near the decorative HOA courtyard downhill from Dana Holloway's showcase garden. The repaired temporary drainage route couldn't compensate fast enough because the original runoff geometry had been altered too heavily. Exactly what the county maps predicted months earlier. Victor cursed under his breath. Then emergency sirens activated across the subdivision. Residents started running. I grabbed my flashlight and moved downhill with the county crews through driving rain while muddy runoff surged across sidewalks. The desert at night during flood conditions feels alive in the worst possible way. Water appears everywhere at once. Street gutters become rivers. Curbs disappear. Storm drains roar like engines beneath your feet. Then the failure happened. Not explosive, not cinematic, procedural. The weakened decorative terrace beside Dana Holloway's courtyard collapsed inward under hydraulic pressure. Water punched through the compromised stonework and accelerated directly across the HOA showcase landscaping corridor. Palm trees bent sideways, stone pathways shattered. Imported gravel erupted downstream like shrapnel. And suddenly thousands of gallons of runoff followed the exact emergency diversion route engineers originally designed decades earlier. Only now the path cut directly through the HOA's illegally modified centerpiece infrastructure. Residents screamed from balconies. County crews ordered evacuations near the lower cul-de-sac. Water rushed across the luxury courtyard where Dana once hosted neighborhood wine socials beneath decorative lanterns. I stood in rain beside Victor watching floodwater reclaim the original contour line hidden beneath all the landscaping fraud. Nature correcting geometry, nothing personal, nothing emotional, just gravity reasserting itself. Then I saw Dana Holloway. She stood near the clubhouse entrance wearing a raincoat over business clothes like she still believed authority could survive presentation alone. Mud covered the lower half of her legs. Her courtyard behind her was disappearing under brown floodwater. For several seconds she simply stared at the destruction silently. No screaming now, no speeches, no polished HOA president voice, just a woman finally watching consequences move physically through space. Victor stepped beside her. "We warned you repeatedly." Donna looked toward the floodwater tearing through the collapsed terrace. "I didn't think—" "No," Victor interrupted quietly. "You didn't listen." That line hit harder than any public humiliation could have. Because it was true. The flood lasted barely 40 minutes. That's all. 40 minutes of accelerated runoff exploiting every structural weakness the HOA introduced into the drainage system. By midnight, the water receded again. The desert always empties quickly after violence. What remained behind looked devastating. The HOA courtyard destroyed. Decorative infrastructure collapsed. Retaining terraces gutted. Multiple additional properties damaged. But this time the consequences were procedurally undeniable. County crews documented everything in real time. Drone units recorded active flow paths. Engineers marked overtopping sequences directly against original federal runoff overlays. No more debates, no more narratives. Physics had testified again, only louder. Near 1 a.m., while residents gathered near emergency response tents beside the subdivision entrance county, investigators approached Dana Holloway formally. Even through rain and flashing lights, I recognized the shift immediately. Tone changes first. Politeness becomes distance. One investigator handed her official documents while another recorded the interaction on body camera. Dana read the first page slowly, then looked up sharply. Emergency injunction. Immediate suspension of HOA Infrastructure Authority pending investigation. Financial freeze requests filed. Mandatory forensic audit. Around us, exhausted residents watched silently beneath umbrellas and emergency floodlights while muddy water still drained slowly through the reclaimed wash corridor behind the neighborhood. No cheering, no applause, just collective exhaustion. Martin stepped beside me quietly. "It's over," he said. I watched county crews tracing the original runoff channel through the destroyed HOA landscaping. "No," I answered softly. "Now it becomes official." 3 months later, the courtroom smelled like dust paper and old air conditioning. That scent always reminds me of systems trying to appear permanent. Outside Scottsdale had already moved on from monsoon season. The desert turned dry again. Floodwater disappeared. Grass returned. Repair crews repainted walls. Palm trees got replaced. Neighborhoods recover visually faster than people do. Inside Department 14B of the County Civil Courthouse, Holloway Ridge Estates finally faced what the storm started. Not weather. Truth. I sat near the back beside Martin Reyes while attorneys organized binders across long tables beneath fluorescent lights. Residents filled nearly every seat in the gallery. Some looked angry, some embarrassed, most simply looked tired. Months of inspections, insurance battles, engineering reviews, and financial disclosures had hollowed the community out emotionally. Dana Holloway entered through the side doors without speaking to anyone. That alone told the entire story. No entourage, no confident smile, no carefully crafted HOA authority image. Just a woman wearing a gray suit sitting beside 2 attorneys and staring at paperwork she could no longer control. The judge entered at exactly 9 a.m. procedural. Calm. No drama. Real accountability rarely looks cinematic in the moment. Mostly it looks administrative. That's what makes it powerful. The county's findings consumed almost 4 hours. Engineering experts presented runoff simulations showing exactly how the HOA's unauthorized landscaping narrowed emergency diversion capacity. Environmental officers explained how the federally mapped overflow corridor had been obstructed without lawful approval. Forensic accountants detailed the financial chain. Inflated contractor bids, layered invoice manipulation, conflict of interest concealment involving Desert Crest Landscaping Solutions. Dana Holloway's brother accepted a plea agreement before the hearing even began. That part shook residents badly, because corruption always feels distant until someone signs documents admitting it existed beside your mailbox. The courtroom projector displayed aerial drone footage from the flood. Water rerouting violently through the HOA courtyard after the drainage corridor failed. County overlays aligned perfectly over the footage, showing the original emergency flow path engineers designed decades earlier. No exaggeration necessary. Reality already looked unbelievable enough. Then Denise Carver testified. Calm voice, precise language. She walked the court through the forensic accounting trail step by step. Over $480,000 improperly routed through inflated landscaping and emergency mitigation enhancement contracts. Several permit identifiers had been fabricated entirely. The room became so quiet during that testimony, you could hear people shifting in their chairs. I watched Dana Holloway carefully then. Not with hatred. That emotion disappeared weeks earlier. What I saw instead was somebody slowly realizing institutions no longer bent around her confidence. The systems she manipulated had finally become larger than her. That's what frightened her. Not me, not the flood. Loss of control. Around noon, the judge paused proceedings briefly before addressing Dana directly. Mrs. Holloway, he said calmly, did you knowingly authorize construction activity before final drainage approvals existed? Her attorney whispered urgently beside her. Dana swallowed once, then answered quietly, yes. No dramatic reaction followed. Just silence. But silence can hit harder than shouting sometimes, especially inside courtrooms. The judge continued. And were residents informed that portions of the runoff corridor remained under unresolved compliance review? Another pause. No. Behind me, somebody exhaled sharply, a homeowner maybe, or someone mourning trust more than money, because that was the real damage inside Holloway Ridge. Not landscaping, not floodwater. Trust. The county ordered sweeping corrective actions by late afternoon. Permanent removal of all unauthorized drainage obstructions. Independent engineering oversight for future infrastructure modifications. Full forensic audit disclosure to residents. Recall certification of the existing HOA board. Financial restitution proceedings. And perhaps most importantly, mandatory county supervision over all flood control easements tied to the subdivision moving forward. Dana Holloway resigned before sunset. Not publicly, not dramatically, just paperwork filed through attorneys. Afterward, reporters gathered outside the courthouse beneath blazing Arizona sunlight while residents slowly drifted into small exhausted groups across the parking lot. Nobody celebrated. That surprised outsiders watching coverage online. People expect revenge stories to end with cheering crowds and humiliation. Real communities don't work that way. Too many people got hurt along the way. Martin stood beside me near the courthouse steps, watching Dana leave through a side exit, surrounded by legal counsel. She won't even look at anyone, he muttered. I watched her disappear into a black SUV. She already knows. Knows that the flood wasn't what destroyed her. Martin stayed quiet, then nodded slowly. Because he understood. Power built on image collapses the moment reality stops cooperating. A week later, county reconstruction crews began restoring the original runoff geometry throughout Holloway Ridge estates. The decorative stone terraces vanished first, then the artificial narrowing berms, then the imported landscaping features that once appeared in HOA newsletters under phrases like luxury desert living. Underneath all of it, the original emergency overflow corridor emerged again, wide, uneven, functional, the way engineers intended. I walked the wash almost every evening during reconstruction, not because I enjoyed revisiting it, because seeing systems repaired matters after long periods of deception. The desert looked different without all the artificial beautification covering the runoff route. More honest somehow. Mesquite roots exposed naturally. Stone channels visible again. Water paths understandable at a glance. Function replacing performance. One evening near sunset, Victor Hale joined me beside the restored diversion corridor. County crews worked farther downstream while orange light spread across the mountains behind us. You staying in Holloway Ridge? He asked. Probably. You could have moved. So could the water. That earned a tired laugh from him. Victor looked over the restored channel quietly. You know, most people would have retaliated differently. Meaning public stunts, lawsuits for attention, social media warfare. I stared at the wash. Water already made the point. He nodded once, then gestured toward the restored overflow path. This'll hold now. Yes, not perfectly, nothing human-made ever does. But better. That mattered enough. Over the following months, the community changed slowly. Residents pushed through new transparency bylaws. Independent audit requirements became mandatory for all infrastructure spending. Open record meeting policies replaced closed executive decision-making on drainage and safety projects. The county later used Holloway Ridge as part of a regional case study on HOA infrastructure oversight during monsoon development planning. That part felt strangely fitting. A neighborhood obsessed with appearances finally became useful only after confronting reality. As for Dana Holloway, rumors spread constantly afterward. Possible civil settlements, potential licensing consequences, private relocation discussions. I stopped following most of it, not out of mercy, out of exhaustion, because eventually you realize accountability is not the same thing as obsession. One evening, nearly a year after the first flood, a summer storm rolled across the valley again. Nothing severe, just rain. I stood on my porch listening to runoff move calmly through the restored wash while lightning flickered softly over distant desert hills. No panic this time, no trapped water, no blocked corridor. The channel carried the flow exactly where it was designed to go. Simple, quiet, honest. And somewhere beyond the dark subdivision lights, families slept without wondering whether hidden greed was waiting beneath the landscaping. That was enough for me. Before heading inside, I looked once more toward the restored runoff corridor, cutting naturally through Holloway Ridge Estates. Then I thought about how close the community came to disaster simply because powerful people wanted beauty without truth. If there's anything worth remembering from all of this, it's simple: document everything. Ask questions early, and never underestimate what happens when ordinary people finally stop confusing authority with competence.